All right. So I want to begin our time together with a land acknowledgement. And I've been thinking a lot about the conflict happening in Ukraine. And I feel so privileged to be living here where it is safe and beautiful. But I recognize it is because of colonization that I'm granted this life. And so I acknowledge that the city of Victoria is located on the homelands of the Songhees and Esquimalt people. Next slide. Thanks, Melinda. So today I'm really pleased to have some great colleagues here to help discuss our grant program. I'll provide the program overview, and Anna Kapusta is going to introduce the city's new placemaking toolkit. Aaliyah Johnson is going to talk about how to have successful projects in our parks and green space. Alex Harned is going to discuss community gardening, boulevards, and food education. And Sarah Webb is going to provide some guidelines for projects that take place on our streets and boulevards. So I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves and their roles at the city at the beginning of each of their sections. And finally, Melinda Jolly is handling all the tech behind the scenes today, for which I am really grateful. So I'm actually going to turn off my camera for the presentations because sometimes I get a bit of a drag on my Wi-Fi. And you may also wish to turn your camera off until we come back for the Q&A portion of the presentation after the presentations are done. Okay. Next slide. Great. So our program is all about connecting residents and building resilient neighborhoods. So we have 3 categories: placemaking, community building activities, and community resiliency. And the city will fund up to $5,000 for placemaking and resiliency projects and up to $1,000 for community building. So this is a matching fund, and the community match is typically the energy and labor required to bring your idea to life. And we put a value on that energy at $20 an hour. So all projects and activities must take place within the city of Victoria. So placemaking is about taking a space, whether it's actively used and might need some brightening up, or it's underutilized and needs some animation, and it's about breathing a new life into it. And some of the key components to placemaking include lighting, seating, and plants. And it's ultimately about creating inviting spaces for people to come together and enjoy and potentially create new connections. Next slide. So just some general guidelines about the scope of our program. This is really about small, easy, and temporary projects. Applicants need to consider design and implementation of your ideas, and also how to take care of it once it's in place. We generally approve installations and programs for a lifespan of up to 5 years. And once this time period is up, we'll meet with you and discuss whether the project can remain for another period of time or if it should be removed. Next slide. So we've approved almost 140 placemaking projects since the program began 5 years ago. We've had residents identify graffiti hotspots and paint bright, colorful murals on them. We've seen boulevard enhancements, seating and plantings, bike racks, and pollinator gardens. You might have noticed some overhead lighting installations in Fernwood Square and over Broad Street, and these have been resident-led projects to help create safe gathering spaces. Next slide. So community development, this category is about bringing residents together through a planned activity like a workshop or a community celebration. They can take place on your street, at your community center, or in a public park. They generally only last a few hours, although they take considerably longer to plan. Next slide. So we've provided funding for new block parties and community celebrations. We've had residents come together to learn about and plant trees. A group of people organized a one-day film festival focused on current urban issues. And some people spearheaded some story circles focused on local Indigenous authors and then purchased some of their books to be placed in the little free libraries around the city. Next slide. So, community resiliency, this category was developed in 2020 when COVID hit us, and we recognized there were some immediate needs in our community we could assist with. So, this category supports community development on a much bigger scale, and the projects address such things as food security, emergency preparedness, and climate change. Next slide. So, our most common theme for this category has been centered around food and emergency preparedness. People have used this grant to support the Growing in the City program, to distribute the city grown seedlings, run garden workshops, and other education programs. Others are supporting local food providers and matching them with people in need. We've had a group of residents on OnStreet create a full emergency plan for their residents, which included distributing water containers to each household. And the photo in this slide shows an emergency bench built by residents on their street. It has a solar charging panel on it, so you can charge your phone. There are emergency supplies in the bench and a community bulletin board on the back. And it serves as a great meeting space for residents to meet and chat. Next slide. So our webpage provides all the information you need to successfully apply to our program. We've got some great tip sheets, sample budgets, help if you need a sponsor, and lots of good information on the logistics of different kinds of projects. There'll be a couple more added soon, so we highly recommend you bookmark this page as your key resource. So that's a general overview of the program. And now I'd like to bring in my colleagues to speak to some specific areas. And we'll start with Anna Kapusta, who's going to introduce the city's new placemaking toolkit.
Thank you, Kimberly. And welcome, everyone. My name is Anna Capusta, and I'm an urban designer with the City of Victoria. And I have been with the city for about 4.5 years. So I have been almost exactly timed as the grant program has been going on. So I've seen a lot of development of those projects, which is very exciting. And today I'm here to present the placemaking toolkit that has been recently approved by our city council. So it's an official new resource that's available for anyone who's interested with placemaking projects. Next slide, please. So the question is, what is the placemaking toolkit? And the way we have structured this is making the toolkit an umbrella document. I know it's a fancy word, but what it does, it frames all different placemaking initiatives in Victoria and supporting temporary and easy implementation of collaborative design interventions and provides more spaces for um, to gather, meet, and play. It really celebrates and builds on the success of the My Great Neighborhood grant that Kimberly just presented to us, and provides more kind of information, strategies, and to encourage more community-led placemaking. It is our new resource, and hopefully it will help anyone interested in placemaking find and understand and apply for existing city programs, and overall will support creative placemaking across the city, and then yeah, just provides a kind of a roadmap and step-by-step process of where to start. Next slide, please. The toolkit also introduces and explains the concept of community-led placemaking. It sometimes feels like it's a bit of a jargon word, and some of us who are interested and maybe know a little bit more about it, but for a lot of people, it's just a word. So there is a lot of definitions and examples in the document. And throughout the document, there are a number of different inspirational images and links to external resources as well, to expand the basics covered in the document itself. because there's a lot of resources out there that we have drawn on to create this document. Next, please. Um, the placemaking toolkit also celebrates on a number of things we already have achieved, and Kimberly kind of brushed on that as well, and builds on the success of existing city programs with some added design strategies and tools, and kind of a clear application process and grant funding process as well. In this way, the toolkit is intended to both kind of simplify it, but also inspire implementation of for more creative placemaking for the city. And it's focused really on the My Great Neighborhood Grant Program, but it also showcases a number of other programs that are available through the city to do more placemaking. Next. So there's a kind of a guidance and guidelines section in the document. And what it does, it really provides kind of a simple one-page explanations and definitions and kind of design strategies to help guide the design process and expedite applications. It contains examples of a range of different types of successful placemaking projects in Victoria. And even today, this is because we talk about the My Great Neighborhood Grant. We have a team of city staff that will help us to learn more and understand the opportunities, but also some limitations for different public areas for placemaking, such as parks and sidewalks and boulevards. So that's more coming up just after I finish talking here. Next one, please. Um, Equity. So we do think that equity is not just a lens that we look through, but we actually think that placemaking is a form of equity. So it is intended, the toolkit is intended also as a tool to empower diverse community groups and equity seeking populations to implement and distribute placemaking opportunities more equitably across the city. So in for everyone in all neighborhoods. Next one, please. Other than information, Placemaking Toolkit, we're trying to provide some more practical tools within the toolkit as well. So the kit of parts catalog is one of the elements of the toolkit and really is an essential resource for community-led placemaking projects in Victoria. It includes city selected and pre-approved choices of elements such as seating and lighting and paint that are one of the key elements that we see in many placemaking projects for any scale of a project. The catalog is meant as a starting point, not it's not a requirement, and it can be added onto and modified. And the catalog, hopefully with time, will grow and change based on the feedback and the use of elements that we see within the community. So we're trying to help kickstart some of the project, but we definitely are not limiting the creativity of the community. Next. What is important? It is different scales because placemaking can really vary. And the toolkit is focused on community-led placemaking projects that can be implemented fast and with less effort through existing grant programs. And the strategies and guidelines section again explains how time, effort, and complexity can and cost affect the scale of placemaking. The toolkit divides these into three options. So there's small, medium, and large scales for placemaking. And small and medium scale really is focused on those community led and could be implemented through a single or couple grant applications. Examples here include like little libraries, boulevard gardening, seating, lighting, murals, and are illustrated um, in the document itself with images from all around the city And then there's also a link to online gallery of different My Green Neighborhood Grant Program implementations as well, which I found to be a very useful resource. Next one, please. And large scale are complex. And because these treatments are beyond the scale of a typical My Great Neighborhood Grant application programs and submissions, they're defined in the toolkit as a placemaking initiatives that will be led by the city with the community collaboration. Examples include city parklets and street plazas, and usually require budget of 30,000 or more, or more of a combined in-kind and cash contributions. And these initiatives typically require more substantial time and investment to plan, engage, develop, deliver, and then evaluate. And resources for such projects would be presented for consideration in the annual financial planning processes in the context of other city initiatives. And I'm sure my colleague Sarah will touch on some of those subjects as well later on in the presentation. And that concludes my presentation. And now I'll hand it over to Aaliyah Johnson, who is going to talk about projects in our parks. Thank you.
Well, hey everyone, I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about how you can apply My Great Neighborhood grants to the city's spaces. Next. Oh, I'm a senior planner with Victoria. So the My Great Neighborhood grant program can be used to support small temporary placemaking projects in the city's network of parks and green spaces. We really emphasize small temporary projects through this program in parks because behind the scenes, the operations of parks are surprisingly complicated, and we found that these kind of small temporary projects are the ones that really work the best through the grants. So I've given you some examples in the following slides of the kind of projects that we've found have been really successful in the past that you could consider for your My Great Neighborhood grants. We've seen this grant stream used for seasonal installations in the park, something like a summer ephemeral community art installation. We've had groups do solar-powered fairy lights throughout the winter in a park. I will say on this one, we can't approve any hookups to the electrical systems typically, so having them be solar powered is important. And you can also use this grant to do portable seating in the parks as well. We do have some guidelines that the My Great Neighborhood team can provide you if you're considering doing portable seating, because we need to be able to move the seating elements to be able to mow the parks. Stuff like that. So we limit the number of pieces you can have and put some requirements on the design of those pieces as well that they can give you some direction on. Next slide, please. You can also use this grant to take advantage of existing concrete surfaces in the park. So we've had groups in the past do murals on retaining walls, do painting on pathways, or even park programming on pathways through painting. We've had groups do like kids bike tracks through the parks by putting different surface applications on the pathways. And we've also had groups take advantage of existing concrete surfaces to put in semi-permanent seating areas, things like large. Oh, sorry. Can you guys hear me okay? Or is my audio funny? I'm going to turn my camera off. Just let me know if
it's coming in and out a little bit.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me better now? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks.
Okay. We've also had groups use this grant program to put seating areas on existing concrete surfaces. So you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen, we had a group put in a custom picnic table at Pemberton Park. using this grant. We do, if you're looking at doing more kind of semi-permanent seating, we do require that that goes on an existing concrete surface rather than requiring a new pad to be poured. Next slide, please. You can also use this grant to install sharing libraries in the park system. And we've had groups do all sorts of different sharing libraries. I think these are limited only by your imagination. So books, seeds, plants, food, toys. And if you're looking at doing a sharing library, we will have city crews install a concrete pad to support those if that's necessary for the location of your library. And we'll help you sort all of that out during your grant application. And one thing to keep in mind with sharing libraries as well is that you're responsible for stocking them and maintaining them over time. So you sign a little maintenance agreement with the neighborhoods team. Next slide. And of course, you can use this grant program to support your neighborhood events and celebrations in parks, community picnics, family games day, temporary children activities or play opportunities. I had a group run bicycle training programs through this grant and all sorts of fun stuff that you can help build community within your neighborhoods through the park system. Next slide. Oh, and you can also use this grant to support some work in community gardens or Boulevard Gardens. And with that, I'm going to hand this presentation over to my colleague, Alex Harnett, who will give you a little bit more information about that.
Great. Thank you so much, Leah. Yeah, my name is Alex. I'm very excited to be here today. I'm the Food Systems Coordinator with the City of Victoria. And hopefully this presentation helps provide more information about how growing in the city intersects with some great community-led projects that could potentially be funded through the My Great Neighborhood Grant. Next slide, please. I wanted to also mention in 2021, over $100,000 of My Great Neighborhood Grant funding supported food systems and gardening related projects. And that really demonstrates the amazing impact that this grant can have to bolster the incredible community-led power doing this hands-on work in each of our neighborhoods. So that's a pretty great statistic to provide. But I wanted to provide some information about what is growing in the city. So Growing in the City is the name of the umbrella program that encompasses all the ways residents can actively participate in growing food and gardening in the city, be it on public land, through community gardening, boulevard gardening, urban food tree stewardship, or in private land through community gardening, small scale commercial urban farming, rooftop gardening, gardening in mixed-use multi-unit developments, or accessing materials through the city's Grow Your Food at Home program, or through Get Growing Victoria, which is the free seedlings and gardening materials program. But for today, we're going to focus on projects that happen on city land. But if you want to learn more about growing in the city in general, all of this information can be found at victoria.ca/growinginthecity. Next slide, please. So in 2022, the City of Victoria has 20 active community gardens, with 2 new community gardens that have recently been approved by council. So those are in development, but new community gardens require following the community garden development process, which involves council approval and can seek funding to establish new gardens through the Community Garden Startup Grant. But once a community garden has sought council approval and has been established, it can then apply for the My Great Neighborhood Grant to fund later stages of the community garden. So examples include building placemaking features like seating areas, benches, or signage, all which require approvals from parks and may require approved drawings from a structural engineer, such as you can see the seating area with the overhead structure. That is one of those things, but that would all be reviewed in the My Great Neighborhood Grant application process. But it's important to list these in your budget costs. Other examples include a mason bee apiary, such as this one located in the Yates Street Community Garden, or wayfinding or community garden signage seen as this one here in Banfield, Tea Garden and Commons in Big West. So these are also subject to follow the City of Victoria Park signage standards, as I think Aaliyah mentioned previously. Next slide, please. So starting a Boulevard Garden is also another eligible application possibly. And so the Boulevard Gardening Guidelines have been designed to help beginner and expert gardens on City of Victoria residential boulevards, to garden more confidently and responsibly. Boulevard gardening does not require a permit, but it is essential to follow the Boulevard Gardening Guidelines, which include calling BC1 before you dig, contacting the City of Victoria to identify your stormwater and sewer lines, and to inform regarding parameters around sight lines, setbacks, design, and more. So we really encourage you to please read and follow these before you begin gardening. Boulevard Gardens can be funded through the My Great Neighborhood Grant through a nonprofit partner organization in partnership with the adjacent property owner, and this can include businesses or residents. Gardening can include food production, native and pollinator, flowers and plants, and can include semi-permanent structures like a little free seed library. The examples here include the raised wheelchair accessible bed and the Pollinator Boulevard in partnership with Pollinator Partnership Canada in front of the Yates Street Community Garden, and the Little Free Seed Library, which you've seen a couple times in this presentation already in James Bay. And so speaking of the power of community, over 3,000 packages of seeds were packaged and distributed through this Little Free Seed Library last year alone. And I think that's a team of maybe like 5 or 6 seniors in James Bay. So that's really incredible, the work that they're doing there. Usually these would be applied under a placemaking category as it's, considering the utilization of space, but could also fall under one of the other 2 categories depending on the nature of the project. For more information about plant material and considerations for allergens in public spaces, we invite you to please check out the resources on our pollinators webpage and the Pollinators and Allergy Aware Gardening in the City of Victoria resources. This also has low allergen planting suggestions of different types of plants. And if they're native or pollinator, they're kind of listed within there in the plant resources as well. So to answer a question that was listed in the chat, it is not a requirement, but we do share these resources with all applicants during the grant review process to help shape their planting plans. Next slide, please. So the Urban Food Tree Stewardship Program is a program that promotes food trees in parks, whereby residents in partnership with a nonprofit organization can apply to plant up to 5 food trees in a park or green space. And this does require parks approval, but it doesn't require going to council for approval, so it's not as long as a process as establishing a new community garden. So the My Great Neighborhood Grant can support the cost of trees, mulch, staking material, and more. It is also possible to apply for an activities grant, to apply for offering different workshops, such as winch and moth banding or pruning workshops for these trees once they're established. And the resource for this program is located on the Growing in the City homepage. Next slide, please. So as mentioned previously, there has been a huge uptake of this grant with the establishment of the Community Resiliency category. From the onset of the pandemic, we saw a huge surge in applications for food systems related projects that actually partner with the existing Growing in the City programs like Get Growing Victoria. And so Get Growing Victoria is the city's free distribution of garden materials and food seedlings program that was launched in the onset of 2020 during the pandemic. This program partners with over 60 recipient organizations across the city and 11 neighborhood distribution days, both for the spring and the summer distribution. And many of the organizations saw a gap in terms of what the city could offer, in terms of what else needed to happen to ensure that this program was as successful as possible. And so the Get Growing Plus program was created, funded through the My Great Neighborhood Grant. So select organizations would apply for funding to apply for soil, tools, other growing soil amendments and mediums, garden boxes, so to ensure that the end user participants were set up for success. Other parts of the program include gardening materials distribution. So the city provides free leaf mulch, compost, and wood chips to be distributed to residents as well. And so we saw a lot of impact through the Migrate Neighborhood Grant to help ensure that people are getting soil, so community composting and those sorts of elements. As well as a series of online gardening and education or in-person workshops were launched in partnership with the Migrate Neighborhood Grant. So very thankful for that. Next slide, please. The Treason Cities Challenge was launched also at the early of 2020, and so this was a UNECE campaign, so an international campaign that was brought forward to encourage urban centers to plant more trees. And so as a part of this program, the Migrate Neighborhood Grant team and myself came together to enable this new activities grant as a part of the Migrate Neighborhood Grant. And so it's a $1,000 grant to plant residential trees. And this is active in the city for as long as the UNECE challenge is happening. And so it's still continuing to the end of 2020, hopefully into 2023. But the mayor made a commitment in partnership with residents to try and plant 5,000 trees during the duration of this campaign. And so similar to the Urban Food Tree Stewardship Program, this will support purchasing trees, staking material, deer fencing, mulching, as well as hiring a landscape arborist professional to come and offer a workshop on how to establish and plant these trees properly. As mentioned before, we have small, medium, and large species selection guides online and other resources like how to pick the right tree for your property, depending on the quality of the soil, solar exposure, those sorts of things. So all the resources are there. You need to apply as a group of residents with a nonprofit partner for up to 10 trees to cover that $1,000 mark. This is a great example. Vic West, and in particular, the Vic West Food Security Collective applied for this grant 7 times and was able to support $7,000 and 78 trees established, fruit trees established in Vic West in February of last year, which is pretty incredible. So we really do encourage you to apply for this grant as long as it's active. Tree planting season will happen again in the fall, so from September until March. So consider applying for this now so you have that funding available for tree planting season. Thank you. Next slide. And then the last component, which really aligns with the same elements of community resiliency, is really looking at how this grant has supported food security and food sovereignty. And so really not looking at just the access of affordable, healthy, fresh food, but the selection of where that food comes from and having culturally preferred foods for communities that, are equity deserving communities in particular. And so this program has been able to fund partnerships through the EA Creative, which Palenque Greens is one of their programs that they offer. They've created a culturally preferred food hamper program in partnership with a series of different local farmers, which is really amazing to see. We've seen things like the Good Food Gathering run by Sierra Fair, which offers different workshops and brings people together from across the region in order to discuss and share best practices to see what's happening in the wider community. And this was funded through the Migrate Neighborhood Grant in 2020 and 2021, I believe. And then also some of the vertical farming for equity deserving communities. This is Harvest and Share Food Relief Society, one of the partners of Get Growing Victoria. We grow the seedlings, they grow the food, and then it's distributed to the food bank, Rainbow Kitchen, a bunch of different community programs across the city. So they're getting not only donated food, which if it's greens, it's usually wilted or maybe past due. They're getting local, fresh, highest quality, picked, less than 10 kilometers away from where it's being distributed directly to those communities in need. So we're really excited that all of these different programs are funded through the Migrate Neighborhood Grant. And that's it for me. So thank you, and I'll pass along to the Manager of Sustainable Transportation Planning and Development, Sarah Webb.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in, and I'll be wrapping up this before I turn it back to Kimberly, and we can have a bit of a discussion and dialogue with the group. The Transportation Division in Engineering and Public Works manages 275 kilometers of roads in our community, as well as pathways and other greenways that are around our neighborhoods. And our primary goal is to help move people, goods, and services, but of course we recognize that streets and roadways are important placemaking and really center around around neighborhood connectivity. And so we do help to facilitate projects on streets and on boulevards. I will flag that projects that are located on streets, we do have a very close working relationship with all Migrate Neighborhood grant applications. And we like to really work hand in hand with those groups because we'll bring in issues like fire trucks and garbage trucks and legal access and manual of uniform traffic control standard, all of those kinds of requirements. So do know that while Migrate Neighborhood grant programs are absolutely possible on streets and in boulevards, we do just want to flag that it does, you should plan to have a close working relationship with our transportation division, and we'll work with you through the neighborhoods team to help find successful solutions on streets and on boulevards. Next slide. Great. So on-street projects can include a variety of activities. We often focus on local roads. So these are streets that are, within less than 1,000 or 1,200 vehicles per day. Often are more neighborhood in scale or more residential streets that support local resident access or local neighborhood access. Projects might include things like street murals or community book boxes, on-street bicycle parking corrals, or even planter boxes with integrated seating. Projects that are on street, are really intended to be community building as a primary goal. So while there may be opportunities that support things like traffic calming, slowing vehicle speeds down, the community building concept is really a primary lead for on-street applications. As mentioned, we need to be thinking about things like underground access to manholes and our underground infrastructure. We have to consider vehicle turning movements and service access. Really, it's about working together with applicants to find the right balance and making sure that we're able to still, sweep the streets, or when snowfall happens, what the plan is around to manage installations that happen on streets. One of the most important pieces is ensuring that we keep our sidewalks free of any obstructions to create clear, consistent pathways for people with disabilities, whether that might be people with mobility scooters, walkers, wheelchairs, or people with vision loss. And so part of our goal is to ensure that any applications that are done on street support the mobility needs of people with disabilities. I will flag that often detailed design drawings are required as we work on street. However, all of the examples that we have been doing recently, we've always found a way to take concepts that neighborhoods have come together, and then we do a little work behind the scenes. And that's something that's really important to us, and we're happy to donate our time to make sure that we can have a successful installation. Also, with projects on streets, there are maintenance requirements and agreements as well. So things like the planter boxes you see here on the screen, not only are they having to be inspected each year and maintained by the community, our staff will go out to make sure that things like those object markers that are reflective on those corners are in good shape and doing their job to highlight at nighttime as an obstruction in the roadway. Next slide. On boulevards are also an opportunity space for the community to do a Migrate Neighborhood grant. Our colleagues in parks, and a part of our goal overall as a part of the city, is to ensure the stewardship of vegetation and trees. So whatever we're working on a boulevard, we always are keeping healthy boulevards as a primary goal. Again, maintaining accessibility on sidewalks and ensuring anything that's being done on a boulevard is not inhibiting the safe and clear passage for people on sidewalks. Some of our boulevards do have underground access, and drainage management is something that we always have to work carefully on. So if you're thinking about things like paving tiles or stones, concrete pads, those will be a part of the conversation that we have with you to find the right balance while maintaining that goal of stewardship of trees and vegetation. I will advise also that using any of these projects where you may have to dig, just like you would at home, BC1 call is required, and we have to make sure that you're not going to be digging into anything that is going to cause a concern with, Fortis lines or communication lines. And so there will be requirements for things like a BC1 call And if you, depending on the scale of your project, you may be required to get a contractor or an excavator permit from the city. So these are all a part of the kind of concept development, and it's about making sure that people are safe while they're installing their projects, but also that are going to be well maintained and work for the kind of functional operations of our cities and crews out in public works and in parks. Finally, I'll just mention that, transportation is something that's really important to our community. And we know that when you make changes on a local street or in our boulevard, there's going to be a lot of expectations around community engagement and dialogue and support with your neighbors. So if you are thinking about something on the street or in the boulevard, we strongly encourage you to really do your legwork, and we're happy to chat with you about that when it means talking to neighbors. Every time we remove an on-street parking stall, somebody's going to know about it. So I just encourage you to really think carefully, and we'll work with you to ensure that it works from a functional and technical kind of things. You're helping to build the support with your neighborhood. So I'll turn it back over to Kimberly and for the rest of the dialogue today.
Thank you, all of you guys. That was amazing. And I know that this has been a lot to take in, especially if you're not familiar with the program. So now it's your turn to ask some questions. And I see that there are already a couple in the chat, and we just encourage you to um, uh, add some more into the chat as you can. So first question, I'm going to ask Sarah to respond to this one. Has anyone considered and consulted on how street murals create a barrier for people with partial vision?
Right. And actually, that was a good question that was asked. Thanks very much, Robin. I did a reach out to our arts and culture group, and while an accessibility review and assessment is done for all of our public art installations, there is not a specific role around neighborhood street murals. So in terms of providing information about how different colors or contrasts can work with different people, we know vision loss is a spectrum, and we also know what individual needs might not, be for one what might not be for another. So I've asked Arts and Culture to see if they can find any resources or helpful tints that we'll put in with the Migrate Neighborhood Grant resources. It's an interesting question, knowing that street murals are located in a space where vehicles often are moving. But yeah, we do want to think about contrast, colors, and what people can or cannot see. So I've passed that along to our Arts and Cultures group, and hopefully we can find some resources to be able to help Migrate Neighborhood applications think about the colors and tones and patterns that they might be using for a street mural.
Thanks, Sarah. That's great. So the next question was talking about the low allergen planting practices on public land, and Alex did address that um, in her presentation. So I'm just going to move on to another question asking about alternatives for submitting applications, given technical barriers in the online application. So I'm gonna tackle that one. Um, I'm not sure what technical barriers you might be thinking of in this particular question, but I will say that we have moved to an online application process, and the link will be live on April the 1st when this program opens. But if anybody has any issues at all with the application process, just reach out and talk to your neighborhood liaison about it, and we will work with you to figure that out. We do we do have a PDF version of just the questions so that you can answer all of the questions in a Word document and then just copy and paste it. We've tried to make it as easy as possible for people to apply. And your neighborhood liaison is the person to talk to about that. We want to support you. We want to uh, we want to make sure that you have a successful application. And so we're going to do a lot of work with you ahead of time to make sure that that happens.
I think, Kimberly, an important piece is in the process is that there's a pre-application meeting with one of you before.
Yeah.
So that's a really,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's a good point. I do want to say that we do require at least one pre-application conversation with your neighborhood liaison, and I'm going to make sure that we post those liaison there's between the three of us, we each have 4 neighborhoods that we're assigned to, and it is our job to help you navigate your way through the whole process to get to a yes. And so before you even submit an application, you are going to talk to us, and we are going to reach out to our colleagues in other departments and learn about what are the risks that are involved, what are the insurance requirements. Sarah outlined quite a few things for our streets and boulevards, and we will talk to you about whether or not your scale is too big or if it's within the scope of this program. So we want to get you to a yes. And so we will absolutely, and this falls into Jonathan's question, reach out to us, bounce ideas off of us. And your neighborhood liaison is your first point of contact for that. And then we will bring in the appropriate other staff to answer all of those questions, which ultimately means that by the time you sit down to fill out your application form, we have answered and supported you with all of the possible questions, pretty much, that as you've just presented to us your idea, we will have answered that so that you have a really high quality application coming into us. And it makes it really easy for us then to say, yeah, all of the technical side of things are checked off, and we will then recommend for approval to our city manager. Okay, so there's another question here, a really good one about expanding on the need for a sponsor or not-for-profit. The Local Government Act, which is provincial legislation, does not allow the city to give money directly to a resident. We can, or a business. We can only provide grants through a nonprofit agency, and they have to be registered in BC and have good standing. So we are providing a sheet of potential sponsors within the city, and that will be posted on our website. We're just adding the last few in as we've been gathering them over the last couple of months. So that'll be up and ready by the end of March. And then as well, we have some guidelines on what it means to be a sponsor. And that is involves the signing the application form. It involves receiving the money and then distributing it out to the residents, and providing insurance if that's possible, and then making sure that the final report is done and filed with the city. So all of the details are all on our webpage. And but thank you very much for asking that, because that is an important question.
And Ashley, I'll just also flag, it's really important if you're a sponsoring organization is that your name is going to be on this. So are you proud of that application? Do you understand what you're taking on in terms of the accountability and responsibility? It's not just being a shell for helping to facilitate. We want you to be involved in a way that your organization feels comfortable and you can meet the requirements of the grant itself. And so, they're not onerous, but they are, to ensure that the safety of people and players, that the project is going to be able to be delivered within the timeline. So not too onerous, but do keep that in mind that you want as a community partner to be proud of this application, and as if you were submitting it on your own.
Thanks, Sarah. It's excellent. I love working with all of you guys. You just fill in those gaps for me. Okay, so another question, will a cabinet outdoor shed that allows neighbors to exchange goods be considered for funding? Yeah, talk to us. Let's talk about what that actually looks like, where the shed would be placed, who would be responsible for it, what the process for managing it is. Yeah, we'd love to talk to you about that, because this helps us with our overall approach to sustainability and our zero waste program. We actually have funded I want to call it an art shed, a pop-up art shed in North Park. And what they're doing is they're pulling art supplies out of the waste stream, and then they're giving that away for free. So you can go to this place and and I don't have too many details on that.
I will flag that the Migrate Neighborhood grant supported the programmatic. The actual lending library hub was through another grant project done with the North Park Neighborhood Association. And again, because it's a structure on our public right of way, part 1 was a big hump, and then part 2 was Supply Victoria coming in to do a craft recycling component. So that's a great example where there was a kind of a 2 parts done over time with 2 different organizations through different grant programs. So, do think about how perhaps your Migrate Neighborhood grant could be a part of something or one step in a process.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We also have another example funded on a street where the neighbors got together and we funded them building a community shed. It is on private property. And so we worked through what the insurance requirements would be for that. And that is an emergency shed, plus it's also a lending library, and it's just for the residents on that street. And we were very interested to see how this would go forward. We told them that we would be watching it as a pilot, and it's been extremely successful. And so, yeah, I think your idea for that outdoor shed is absolutely feasible, and love to talk to you more about that. When will funding be received after the application? Another excellent question. You guys are like completely engaged here. I love it. So how our process works is that we will open on April the 1st. And throughout the month, we will be talking to you all and receiving applications. And once they are all, they've been reviewed and approved internally by staff, at the end of each month, we will submit those that are ready to be formally approved to our city manager. And so it's basically the last Thursday of the month. I gather up all the applications and I send them to Jocelyn Jenkins. She reviews them, and we go through that little review process. And once we get her approval, then we are able to create a letter of agreement, which we then send to you for signature. If it's a group of residents, your sponsor will need to sign that as well. Once you return that letter of agreement to us, we send your request for funds to finance. So, and then they cut the check the next Wednesday. Essentially, that's when we do our check runs. So we can get the money to you quite a bit quicker than in the past when we were only doing 2 intakes a year. And I would say from the time that we've said to you, your application is complete, and we put it into the next cycle. Once it goes to the city manager, it's probably 2 to 3 weeks from the time we get her approval until the time we can put funds, depending on how quickly you get the letter of agreement back to us. So it's quite quick, and we're counting on building on the momentum and the excitement of all of the work that you've put into the application to then move forward into implementation. Okay, so can an individual apply for funding to plant fruit trees in the boulevard? So there's 2 parts to this question, and I will cover off one, and then I'll hand it over to Alex to talk about the fruit trees in the boulevard part. An individual, no. The whole idea behind this and the spirit of this grant program is about building community. And so we would want an individual to go and bring in residents on your street to come together to do this as a community development activity. And so you would need a nonprofit sponsor to as I said, to manage the financials side of things. Alex, talk about the fruit trees part.
Thanks, Kimberly. Yeah, I was able to answer the question in the chat, but I can speak to it here. Yeah, generally we do not support planting trees on boulevards for many reasons, but they might outgrow the space and become costly for removal in time. And so only trees planted by the city are allowed on boulevards, but the exception is that some varieties of dwarf trees, fruit trees, when mature, are similar in size to a standard berry bush. However, the fruit trees that we've had planted on boulevards to date have been managed properly, but they've had to be removed because of sight lines when people are backing out of their driveways. So I really would recommend, for the sake of the health of the tree and for all the effort that you want to put into it, please apply for the Urban Food Tree Stewardship Program. They'll be established, they'll be permanent, there won't be any issues there, and that program is supported through the Migrate Neighborhood Grant. We've also received additional funding just this year through Council to have a fund to establish water connection for those sites. So I would really encourage you to apply for that program if you're looking to establish more fruit trees in the city.
Mm-hmm. And just to put a fine point on that answer, apply for the urban stewardship program first, and then once you get those approvals in place, then that approval can come to us with your grant application, because then we know that all of that background work has already been done, and it's almost like a rubber stamp of approval. So what's the rationale for needing to partner with a nonprofit? So excellent question. And this is provincial legislation. It prohibits us from handing out grants to individuals and businesses. So your second part of that question is difficult navigating requirements with neighborhood associations. So neighborhood associations are a good a partner often for these grant programs as a sponsor, but they're not the only ones. It can be any nonprofit registered within BC that operates in Victoria. So with the placemaking grants, we have often had the Greater Victoria Placemaking Network participate and act as a sponsor in some of these grants coming forward. For some of the food related and the gardening grants, we've had those nonprofits in that sector acting as the sponsor. So you're not limited to a neighborhood association, and I'm really glad you asked that question. And the next question is about being a sponsor. So as a community partner sponsoring an individual project, do you have helpful tips for vetting the process of a Migrate Neighborhood grant application? Yeah, we do. And ideally, somebody who's looking for sponsorship would come to you and lay out their idea, let them know they've been already in communication with us and that we have given some general support for that, and that one of the things that they need is this nonprofit. Ask them the questions that you need to ask to make yourself feel comfortable in the sponsorship of the program. So do you have confidence in them being able to actually follow through and complete the project as it's been presented to you? Ask them to see ask them to share with you if they need design drawings and whatnot. And also feel free to be in communication with us, because there are some things that we can share as the neighborhood liaisons. We can share with the potential sponsoring organization some of the lessons that other organizations have learned and shared with us over time. So how to choose a liaison neighborhood if the project is an event open to multiple neighborhoods? Great question. We generally say, where's your primary, where's your first event going to be held? If you're going to hold it over a series of weekends, where's the first one? Or if you are going to run it concurrently, just choose one. We don't really care. It just has to happen within the city. And so if you are looking to maybe look at all of the southern, running something in James Bay and Fairfield and Jubilee concurrently, well, that's me. So if you're, you want to run something in Oaklands and Jubilee, it could be myself or it could be Gary Pemberton. And we would just, we're not going to be too finicky about that. We're not, we have a lot of flexibility built into our program. So yeah, just pick one of us, reach out. Let's go. Okay, I'll probably forget who my liaison is. Is there somewhere I can look that up? Yes, there is. And thank you, Alex, for answering that and posting that. We will also be providing that they're already posted on our neighborhood grant webpage, and we will be summarizing all of these links that you saw in the chat, as well as the contact information for your neighborhood liaisons. It'll all be going out in an email following in the next few days. It'll include the recording of this. It will and any other links that we may want to throw in sort of at the last minute for you. Okay, moving right along. These are really great questions, all. Thank you so much. Can it be any nonprofit? Yeah, I think I've answered that question already. Nonprofits prefer that that your project kind of aligns with the work that they're doing. That's been my experience, and I think that's great because they can also provide some input and some feedback on the scope of your project and also how to make it more successful. So yeah, it can be any nonprofit, but yeah, better to find somebody that the work aligns with. So can the grant fund annual events? Yes, we will fund a new community celebration or a new block party, but we can only do that once. So you'll need to look for other sources of funding once we fund that first one for you. Okay. Let's see here. Can I get a copy of this chat? I'm not sure, Salome, how we would do that for you, but let me see. Technically, Melinda and I can talk offline and see if that's possible for
And
you.
all
Okay.
of the resources will be shared out in an email.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, Anna. You first was held in Quadra Village, and then Fernwood this year might be Oakland's. Yeah, give Gary a call. He'll be very familiar with that because those are Quadra Village is his neighborhood, and Oakland's is also his neighborhood. So, okay. Well, it looks like we've kind of run out of the question. Oh, here's one more, Anna. Are there any limitations or guidelines on funding minority demographics like LGBTQ? No, there are not. In fact, we have no restrictions on at all, anything at all like that. So, who's the best to talk to about traffic calming? Okay. Shiko, if you want to email neighborhoods@victoria.ca, and if somebody could, I'll put that into the chat. And if there's a specific neighborhood, if you could just email us and we'll get back to you. We do have a traffic calming division within our transportation team.
Hi, folks. I'm back
Oh,
actually just because I saw that question come up. Thanks so much for
okay.
bringing it. Yeah, you don't email neighborhoods. I'm just going to pop in the engineering@victoria.ca. We have a traffic calming program that currently prioritizes parks, school zones, local roads that are over 1,000 vehicles a day, or local roads that have collision history. Traffic calming is not a direct solution that we use on collector or arterial streets, but we do have some options as we move forward. So please do send us an email at eng@victoria.ca. You can also check out the traffic calming link on our webpage directly. You know, the reality is that we receive hundreds of emails a week, and so apologies in advance if someone in the transportation division has not got back to you. So please do send that, and I'll flag it for our traffic calming team. I will just identify also that we do have priorities that are established by council for traffic calming, And so what your individual need or interest or area is might not actually fit our traffic calming threshold. So do keep in mind that it is something more of an iterative process along the time. So our email address is in there and our web link is in the chat as well.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate that. Alex, what would you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention with regards to the nonprofit associations, I had questions previously when discussing the My Great Neighborhood grant about eligibility to apply for each stage of funding at same or various times, and if sponsoring a neighborhood group would then infringe upon their ability to apply for funding. So I just wanted to clarify, and I think this is correct in saying that your application as as the primary applicant as a nonprofit organization is not affected if a resident group would also like to apply for that stage of funding at the same time. So if a group of residents are interested in applying for the Treason Cities grant to plant trees in their private property, it doesn't prohibit you as a nonprofit, let's say Vic West Community Association, for also applying for an activities grant for a different program. So just wanted to share that when you're thinking about if you're going to sponsor a group or not, that it doesn't affect your eligibility to apply for funding.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, there's just so much about this program that it's difficult to capture all of the details in an hour's presentation. So without overwhelming everybody as well. So I appreciate that input. Okay, Jonathan has asked for any of these programs, has the city been involving local Indigenous groups, the leadership from Songhees and Esquimalt Nation to provide feedback and input into any proposed projects? So the answer is yes, and it is sort of left to the applicant to manage those communications. And so for example, there's some heritage signs that were installed on Layton Street in Jubilee, and there is one that specifically speaks to the Garry Oak Meadow and the Camas, and there are some words there from one of our local Indigenous, I'll call her a community champion. So they were consulted, and she did respond, and the sign is really quite lovely because it does bring into for the heritage purpose of this sign, the historical uses of Garry Oak Meadow and camas bulbs and whatnot. And we do know that there have been other applicants reach out to our local nations, and also not just our nations, but our other local minority groups, when they're working on a project that has some level of significance that's outside of their level of expertise. So they are bringing in, but as I said, it's not a requirement, but we do absolutely encourage it. Okay, well, I think we may have run out of questions. So I just want to say thanks to my colleagues for taking the time today to share all of your expertise and the guidelines that will really help make all of these grant projects really quite successful. And this year we have over $131,000 to hand out. So if you can imagine, in $5,000 and $1,000 increments, we can typically fund between 40 and 50 projects and activities. So I hope this presentation's been worth your time and that it inspires you to take on an improvement on your street or your neighborhood. And Melinda, if you want to go to the next slide. Just as we wrap things up, I'm going to let you know that next month in April, it's our final, oh, great, there we go. And the next slide. It's our final community virtual lunch and learn for the year, and we are going to be talking about traffic calming. And so we will give you that link to go and register for that if that inspires you and if you're interested in that as well. So yeah, I hope this has been really valuable, and we look forward to talking to you about your ideas and seeing how we can bring them all to life. So have a great day, everybody. Goodbye.